Welcome to the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, we welcome back two friends of the podcast, my admissions colleagues and members of the Admissions Committee here at the Darden School of Business, Whitney Kestner and Catie Yeilding, to talk all about event engagement. If you're wondering about which Darden events might be right for you, what role do events play in the business school research process, this episode is highly recommended. So without further ado, here's my interview with my admissions colleagues, Whitney Kestner and Catie Yeilding. Catie, Whitney, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Brett. It's great to be here.
Happy to be back.
It's great to have you here. Another season, another conversation about event engagement. And it feels like the right time. There's a lot happening in Charlottesville these days. I'm thinking about all the events that are on the horizon. And of course, in-person interviews have resumed. How are those going? Y'all are busy today.
It's a great day here on the Darden grounds. Sun is shining, lots of early action candidates interviewing, and it has been wonderful to have these prospective students here on the Darden grounds interviewing, getting a sense of the community, exploring. I definitely am deriving a lot of great energy from it.
I think a theme of this conversation today will be around all the different ways you can get to know Darden. And it's been fun to have these on-grounds events back in the mix, get to know some of our applicants, and getting to meet them off screen has been a highlight of this week.
Yeah, it's been an equally busy time here in Roslyn, but maybe for slightly different reasons. We actually had our part-time MBA students in person this week, a class Monday and Thursday night. So they were just here. I'm recording this on Friday, so they're just here last night for leading organizations with Laura Morgan Roberts. They're very much in quarter one. And this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, is the first weekend residency for our executive MBA class of 2024. So a lot of things happening here in Roslyn too. So for our listeners who haven't had a chance to listen to your prior episodes, you both are relatively frequent guests on our podcast. But for folks who have not heard those episodes, let's do some introductions first. Catie, can I come to you? Tell us a little bit more about who you are and your role here at the Darden School.
Hey, Brett, I'm Catie Yeilding. I'm on the admissions committee at Darden. I've been with the program, I'm in my 10th year now, and work primarily with our full-time candidates and work through the evaluation process. So get to work with our team members who are also reading and interviewing candidates, as well as some of our students who are involved in that process as well.
All right, thank you, Catie. And Whitney, coming to you next.
Sure. Thanks, Brett. Also a member of the admissions committee, entering into my 15th admissions cycle, which has been wonderful, and work closely with both of you, which is an absolute pleasure. I do help with our recruiting and evaluation for our full-time and full-time candidates, as well as help with recruiting for our working professional programs, the part-time and exec programs you just mentioned, plus the Masters in Business Analytics that we partner with the McIntire School of Commerce here at the University of Virginia. So definitely lots going on, lots of ways to meet some pretty interesting people.
For our listeners, these are two very busy people. They got a lot going on, but they always have time for the podcast. Our favorite kind of guest. So let's talk about events. I mentioned at the top that the frame for today's conversation is really about event engagement. And I think a good place to start, Whitney, is when people look at all the events on our website, there's in-person events, there's virtual events, there's webinars, there's chats. What would you want prospective students to know about, from our team standpoint, the strategy behind the events that we're offering?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway is hopefully you see there are a lot of great options. There are so many ways to learn about Darden, what this experience can be. And, we have really, I think, been creative and innovative in the types of ways that we are offering candidates to learn about Darden and connect with different members of our community. So the virtual and in-person events really just want to give people options to, where they are, sort of where they're located and what logistically makes sense. But just really that flexibility, those different offerings to to sort of figure out what makes the most sense for each individual candidate.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we learned during the pandemic is that you can make connections via virtual events. I think about the workshops that we posted that have that personal engagement to them. Obviously, the virtual chats do as well. So, and also recognize, to your point, not everybody can necessarily travel all the way to Charlottesville and visit in person. So, Catie, coming to you, kind of a related question here. How should prospective students be thinking about virtual and in-person events? Is there a right mix here? What do you encourage people to think about?
Well, thanks for asking. And I think to echo the point, there are so many options these days. And I think it does take a moment to kind of step back and think about what are the ways that I can get to know more about the MBA, get to know more about Darden, and then really being strategic in when's the right time to engage with the different types of resources. You want to make sure that done your research on all the different resources available and then get involved where you're able and when you're able. So we do travel to various locations around the United States and around the globe at times. And so we may have in-person events there, but we also now have some on-grounds events here in Charlottesville. And then we continually are hosting virtual events. Some are all comers. They're going to be general types of topics. Some of them are going to be very specific for the stage of readiness for the MBA or targeted to people with specific interest. And so really assessing all of those different types of resources and then assessing where you are in that research stage and then taking it from there.
Well, building on what you just shared, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are distinct stages in this MBA process, and you don't have to solve every question and you have to necessarily know everything from the very beginning, right? You have a long time to figure this stuff out. Whitney, this is something that we talked about on our application tips podcast series, that you actually can continue the research process after you press submit on an application. And of course, if you're admitted, there's so many resources that are made available. How do you encourage people to think about sort of pacing through this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's probably going to look a little bit different for each person. And again, sort of, I like how Catie framed it, sort of where you are in the process. With a lot of the webinars that we host, these sort of all-comer, very big topic around the application and tips within that, career resources. We've got an upcoming one about global opportunities. So those are really this wonderful way to get a very high level overview, I think, of different aspects of the Darden experience and the application process. And so I think those are very easy to engage with, allow you to take in a lot of information and ask questions. But then we have some smaller scale events, these virtual chats that we've talked about, and some workshops and other things of that nature that are going to be a little bit more conversational in style and may allow you to go a little bit deeper. So in many ways, I feel like these types of events are so great sort of early on in the research process and hopefully a complement to a lot of the non-event resources that we have. The podcast will definitely be promoting the great podcast episodes that we've been doing around application tips. We've got a wonderful Discover Darden blog and a really, I think, in-depth, insightful website with a lot of great content there. So, sort of this mix, we do have, as Catie said, more on-grounds opportunities. We have class visits and we have open houses. And I think those can be a way to, obviously come here to Charlottesville, to the Darden grounds, experience, these things that you've likely been researching in advance for yourself, observing a class, engaging, talking to more students. And so we will offer class visits throughout the academic year. So we really do recognize that there's no one right time to come visit. We will host open houses are typically going to be through the fall, and those are a full day of programming most often on Mondays. We will be opening up more for later in the fall very soon. But so there are going to be some really, I think, nice ways to come to Charlottesville if that works for you and your schedule and sort of where you're located.
I think every student kind of has to figure out how much information they need to know if they want to move forward with an application or move forward with the school in terms of that next step in the process. When you talk about researching schools, there's so many schools, but then you kind of get to a more discrete list. And you say, okay, this is where I'd like to kind of focus my application energy. Of course, you can't apply to every school, so you have to make some choices here. Catie, how do you encourage people to kind of think about, like, is there a tipping point here where, like, I know enough to move forward and, I'm going to continue to do the research?
I think you're spot on in your description that I think it takes time for a candidate to really assess their readiness to apply to the MBA and then assess their comfort and understanding of particular programs and what's going to be a good fit for them. And I think these types of visits, this engagement with an admissions team also follows that same trajectory. And so I think a candidate really needs to think about when's the right time to ask the right types of questions and when to do that research using resources like the website, the blog, and when's the right time to ask maybe some more personalized questions and really be thinking about the different types of platforms we have for that. And so I would encourage candidates to really think carefully about how they use their engagement opportunities at what stage in the process. To your point at the very top of our conversation, there's kind of a progression here, and you don't need to know everything from conversation one. It's kind of an ongoing learning process. And so, engaging in these types of events, whether they're in person with us here in Charlottesville or in cities where a candidate may live, or whether they're in virtual spaces, being mindful about what's the right type of information to gather from that exchange.
Well, I like so much of what y'all have shared here, because one of the things that our colleague Catherine Alford noted in her episode about researching schools in the App Tips playlist is really about how important it is to know yourself as you research schools and what's important to you. I think a lot of people will oftentimes charge out and look at what the market is saying and, oh, here's the top schools and this kind of thing. But when doing that, you can kind of lose like what has personal resonance for you and what actually matters to you in terms of your learning style or the kind of community that you'd like to be a part of. And so that sort of self-reflection is a really important part of this process. I also think as a team, we have built out a lot of resources for candidates over the past 3 or 4 years. Certainly the pandemic accelerated some of this, but all the things that you've mentioned, we've got a website, we have a blog, we have podcasts. And I also think, not to give folks homework necessarily, but let's imagine you sign up for a webinar and the webinar is about the application process. I think in our minds, when we think about people showing up for that webinar, we imagine that you've spent some time with the application tips section of the blog. You've also looked through some of the application FAQs. You may have even listened to a podcast or two or checked out some episodes of the App Tips playlist about applying. And so if you're coming, you're working with a baseline of information, not totally a blank slate. And you're coming and saying, all right, I already know some things about this. And this person that's leading the session is going to be able to give me even greater insight than what I've been able to glean from these resources and kind of build on the information that I already know. And I'm going to be able to ask maybe next level questions here because I've already done some research. Whitney, does that resonate with you?
Most definitely. I think that the sort of next level questions, to have done some research in advance, to not just come in cold. I do think it allows for a more meaningful engagement with the admissions committee or whoever is hosting that chat or hosting that webinar. I think that that's great advice.
I hear some parallels to maybe the Darden case study method.
Oh, yeah.
You need to first review the material, work through it by yourself, maybe meet with others and talk about it. And then you come to class for the next level, for the deeper discussion. I think that there's some parallels to how you show up for an admissions related event there too. You want to make sure you're making the most of the time that you have with the resources available.
All right, A+ there for Catie Yeilding.
We're really just weaving it together here at Darden.
And it's very impressive, Catie, that you were able to connect it all back to the case method and the pedagogical approach here at Darden. But I also think like part of this is about intentionality. And Whitney, you and I talked about this a lot, particularly when you start talking about not just event engagement, but you talk about engaging with current students and alums and being intentional through this process. What does that mean when you say it's important to be intentional as you research schools?
Yeah, I think that covers a lot. I think, being intentional is about recognizing who you're speaking with and sort of what their experience is. Talking to a current student is, can be so insightful as to their student experience, what they're involved in, really get to hear from their time, what clubs, what classes, how they've learned in the case method. And then thinking about, being intentional as you're talking to an alum who is, now progressed beyond their time as a student. And so probably has that, hopefully has had that ability to reflect on it and to be able to talk about the skills, the experiences they gained from their Darden MBA and how they're applying that through in their career, how they have leveraged the network, sort of where they are in their career to date and sort of what they really feel has been most meaningful to them about their MBA experience. So I think there's intentionality as to sort of where that person is in the conversation and what they've done. I think it's also being intentional about, their time and their sort of being respectful of, scheduling and making sure that hopefully it's a meaningful conversation both ways, that you come into that conversation definitely having done some baseline research and knowledge about Darden and the experience so that your questions can, go that much deeper as we've touched on. I think that's going to allow for a great conversation and really building those relationships, building that network, which I think is a very elemental part of the MBA experience as well.
Yeah, picking up on that and kind of picking up also on Catie's point earlier about how this is kind of like the learning process here at Darden. I mean, a lot of this approach that we're advocating for here is really kind of the approach you would follow as an MBA student, whether you're getting ready for class or you're engaging with an alum or networking with an employer. Like, just imagine you go to a networking event with an employer. Of course, you're going to want to know about that company and why you're interested in that. What if somebody asks you a question? Why are you here? This kind of thing. And it all comes back to thinking about what matters to you, doing that research, putting in that time so that when you are there, you can really make the most of the event. So in a lot of ways, some of the habits that you're cultivating here are going to continue to be a part of your MBA experience. Catie, when you think about intentionality with event engagement, what does that mean to you?
Oh, well, I think we're really honing in on the specifics here. And we want people to get as much out of these engagements as possible. We're here to be a resource, to share, to help people along in this process. And the more somebody can come in with a real understanding of what that particular event is going to offer, the more that we can help the candidate. And so if it's a high-level webinar, then there's not going to be as much one-to-one engagement. There's going to be some Q&A, but more limited. If you're in a coffee chat scenario, that's where we want to actually have a conversation with the people who join us there. And so coming ready for that, knowing who else is going to be in that virtual or in-person space with you, or on grounds, preparing, understanding how to best utilize your time. The more that you can really think through why you are spending your time in this way, what you want to get out of it, the more that the person who is leading that session, the person who is there with you, is going to be able to help you out.
One of the things I wanted to add, thinking about, sort of being intentional in these types of events, is who else you're there with. So one of the things that I hear candidates when they come to a chat, and I'll say similar, kind of to an open house where it's kind of a smaller group of people where you're going to spend a more concentrated time together. They really value hearing, questions that other candidates have, and I didn't think of that, or that's really going to help them sort of broaden their perspective in this research process and application process. It also gives you a sense for maybe who you could be in class with, getting a sense of the diversity of the backgrounds, professional and academic training, lived experiences, where people are coming from all over the United States and all over the world. So I think there's this really neat element of being able to engage with people who are going through a similar process as you and can really relate, I think can be so valuable. So definitely appreciate when those types of connections and those conversations spark amongst attendees at a chat or at an open house.
Well, I think about our boss, Donna Clark, always talking about approaching the process with joy, and that so much of this is also about the connections that you'll make along the way. You're going to meet a ton of interesting people, but you have to be ready to make the most of those interactions and really kind of say like, all right, I'm going to show up. I'm going to be present for this. I'm going to make the most of this coffee chat. I'm going to see who else is in the room and be really fully engaged with it. I appreciate all of that. So our folks who may be working on an application, planning to apply or have already applied, maybe wonder, does event attendance matter as we're thinking about applicants? Is this something that we take note of as an admissions committee? Catie, what say you?
We definitely appreciate engagement. We love to see that our candidates have spent time learning about us, getting to know us. It is not a formal part of our evaluation process. We understand that everyone has different limitations and constraints and how they may engage with their MBA application journey. And in no way will someone's event attendance, virtually or in person, impact their evaluation process. We do appreciate that if you can't attend events that you perhaps cancel so that someone else can take your spot. There's my little asterisk caveat.
Yeah.
Well, I also think, though, about one of the questions that it's pretty important in the interview because we don't ask about it in the application, sort of why Darden is something that you should fairly expect to come up in your Darden interview. You can sometimes tell a difference between the people who've really been engaged with our team and have done their research and been intentional in the ways that we've been talking about, and maybe folks who haven't necessarily invested that time. Is that fair to say, Whitney? Is that something that you pick up on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is that moment in the interview where you get a sense for, why they want the MBA and in particular, curious as to their interests at Darden. We've got such a strong community here. I think this is a place where the more that you engage, the more that you will get out of it. And so I really appreciate, when a candidate is interviewing and that they display that they've done some research, that they have a sense of who we are. I also appreciate this process, this journey that they're on, and recognize that they may not know, how awesome Darden is at that very moment. And so, is the interview or another point an opportunity for me to share with them? But we take a lot of pride in what we do and feel, so strongly about the Darden experience and are excited to share that with candidates. And so it is nice when, you sort of met, the candidate kind of meets you with that interest and excitement to learn more.
Yeah, again, I recognize that this is an ongoing process. I think I'm always listening for, has this person, done some research and found some things that are personally resonant with them about the Darden experience? It may not be everything, but at least some things that really say to the applicant, I thought that this was a great place for me for these reasons, and this stuff is important to me personally. Last question. We don't let admissions committee members come on the podcast without sharing a tip, piece of insight for applicants. Obviously, we talked a ton about event engagement and just engagement generally, and importance of intentionality and being present and really being prepared for these interactions. And all of that is important. But of course, people are going to work on their applications and may also be curious about an application tip or two. So Whitney, any favorite tip for this admission cycle that you've been sharing with candidates?
This is tough because we've talked about finding joy and being intentional and being self-aware, sort of knowing yourself. Those are definitely, I think, important. Let's see. I mean, I think something that we haven't talked about as it relates to the application, and a little bit, kind of pulling on this research, is thinking about the recommendation. And so much of the application process is your narrative, what you're sharing with us, your accomplishments. A recommendation is somebody other than you. And so being very strategic about who you ask to write your letter of recommendation. And when you not just identifying that person or people, that we require one, but making sure that you help them understand about why you're excited about business school in Darden, remind them of what you've worked on together, and then leave them to write the letter of recommendation themselves. But just, I know that's kind of coming out of left field, but an application tip that hopefully resonates as people are working through the process now.
Well, it's of course the one part of the application that the applicant doesn't fill out themselves. And so it's an important choice. And you're right, you have potentially up to 2 recommendations, only one is required. And so I think it's also worth thinking about that person's perspective and how it fits in the overall story of your application, giving that person enough time. So maybe getting back to the overall theme here of intentionality, we generally recommend give them a couple weeks or so, if possible, to work on the recommendation so that they can really be thoughtful about what they're sharing with our team. So there's absolutely related to what we've talked about here today. Catie, do you have a favorite tip you've been sharing with applicants this year?
Oh, I loved the themes of today. It's been, I think, some really heartfelt guidance from us, if I do say so. But I think kind of returning to the theme of taking some joy in the experience and saying, reflecting on why a candidate is going through all of this. It's a lot of hoops, going to events, deciding where to engage, all of that, really being mindful about the reasons why, and not just doing it to check something off the list, but to be really thoughtful about what's going to be most helpful, what's going to be most informative, what's going to be the best use of time that's limited for all. And so want to make sure that we're creating spaces where we're going to be able to help people as much as possible, and want to make sure that candidates are enjoying the process as they get pumped up and excited for this next chapter for their education and for their careers.
Yeah, that's all great advice. When I was talking with Donna about joy for one of our app tips episodes, and of preparing yourself for the application process, she had this great frame as she talked about even researching schools, right? So spending time on a school's website, well, that's a joyful thing. Thinking about your life as a student at that school, that's also joyful. Looking back on all of your accomplishments and thinking about how you want to tell your story through the application. It's a time to be proud of yourself, and also a time to be joyful about the step that you're embarking upon and your willingness to put yourself out there in this way. I had never really thought about it as this kind of celebration, or how exciting that I'm getting to dream and to imagine what's possible for me in this way. And I thought that was a tremendous way of framing the whole enterprise. So Whitney, Catie, thank you so much, as always, for making time for the podcast. It's great to have you here. And to our listeners, best of luck as you engage with our team. Take advantage of the events, but be intentional as you do it. And that was my interview with my admissions colleagues and members of the admissions committee here at the Darden School of Business, Whitney Kestner and Catie Yeilding. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.